Greetings, Pokéfans! Michael here, and today I'll be covering 50 surprising Pokemon stats. Stat values that don't make sense based on the Pokemon's, well, biology. We'll start with offense. Tinkaton has a lower attack stat than Teddiursa. Despite wielding an enormous metal hammer with ease, this fan-favorite Corviknight killer hits softer than a teddy bear. Speaking of Corviknight, while it has a decent attack stat of 87, Shedinja has a higher one at 90. Can someone explain to me how this basically dead cicada shell can slash harder than a giant metal bird? If it was special attack, I would get it, but physical? Talonflame has a lower attack stat than Charjabug. The bird of prey known for powerful Gale Wings brave birds somehow hits softer than a pudgy bug battery. Speaking of small bugs, Larvesta somehow has a higher attack stat than Charizard. I know Charizard's mainly a special attacker, but still, how does a barely mobile bug do anything better than a dragon? Trapinch also has an astounding base 100 attack, which is higher than Poliwrath. I get that Trapinch has big chompers, but it's hard to believe that it could hit harder than Poliwrath, a Pokemon known for being able to swim across the Pacific Ocean with ease. Another small but mighty pinching Pokemon is Krabby, whose ridiculous base 105 attack is higher than Infernape. I get that crab pinches hurt, but I wouldn't expect them to hurt more than a punch from a combat ape. Mothim has a higher attack stat than Hawlucha, which makes no sense to me considering one is a wrestler and the other is a moth. Flapple, which is a worm in an apple, has a higher attack stat than Aerodactyl, a prehistoric enormous fanged beast. Arkin has an even higher attack stat than that at 112, which is higher than Kamo-O. I know Arkin and Archeop's whole thing is that they're supposed to be like, oh wow, so strong, and then nerfed by Defeatist. However, even with that knowledge, it still doesn't make any sense to me that this small bird that can't even fly can strike harder than an enormous armored pseudo-legendary dragon. Flareon has the same attack stat as Machamp, which is a very high 130. Machamp having a very high attack stat makes perfect sense. It's a ripped, four-armed fighter. But Flareon? It's a small fox cat thing that could be a pet if it wasn't on fire. Like, do the flames make the strikes and tackles that much stronger? As strong as a Machamp, which can punch things over the horizon? Onix has an infamously low attack stat of only 45, which makes no sense at all, considering that it's an enormous monster made of solid stone. This makes its physical hits softer than Sentret, Rookidee, Joltik, take your pick of small, feeble Pokemon. This poor attack carries over to Steelix, which is the same thing, but bigger and metal. While its attack improves to 85, this is still pretty low, considering it's the same as a Mungus, a 2-foot-tall, squishy mushroom. Bastiodon is another rock and metal beast with a weirdly low attack stat of only 52. I get that it's mainly a defensive Pokemon, but I see no logical reason for it to hit softer than Tynamo. Zen Mode Galarian Darmanitan, which is a hot, bouncy snowman, has an astronomical attack stat of 160. This is higher than Groudon, Rayquaza, Zekrom, and even Crowned Sword Zacian. To be fair to Zacian, its attack stat used to be 170 before it was nerfed in Gen 9, and it still gets the Intrepid Sword boost once per battle. But like, there's any universe where the bouncy snowman hits physically harder than a legendary wielding a sword? All right, all those had to do with physical attack. Now let's talk about special. Murkrow has the same special attack stat as Blastoise. This baffles me. One is a small bird. The other has literal cannons coming out of it. Blast is in its name. How do they blast equally? Dolliv has higher special attack than Uxie and Cresselia. I understand that these legendaries are more bulk focused, but still, they're psychic type legendary Pokemon. Psychic is like the special type. So it's crazy that there are any psychic legendaries that hit softer than an Olive Doll. Speaking of psychic types, Claydol has a lower special attack stat than Unknown and Wormadam Plant Cloak. Again, Claydol is more bulk focused, but it's still weird that a fully evolved Psychic type does less special damage than this goofy plant bagworm and one of the most infamously useless Pokemon ever made. Abra is a Psychic type that does have higher special attack, but it's crazy high. It's 105, which is higher than Greninja's 103. I know it's a Psychic type, the special type, I just said that, but it spends all its time fleeing and sleeping. Yet somehow it has more offensive power than Greninja, one of the strongest starters ever made? Noivern, a Pokemon well known for blasting powerful sound waves and being one of the Pokemon to introduce the move Boom Burst, has a lower special attack than Roselia, which is, I don't know, just a small flower thing. Haunter has a special attack stat of 115. This is surprising not only because that's a really high stat, the third highest special attack of any Pokemon that was never fully evolved, only behind Kadabra and Duosion, but also because it's higher than Sylveon's 110. This is crazy to me because when I think of Sylveon, I think of brutally strong special fairy attacks like Pixelate Hyper Voice. Pixelate does boost the power of Sylveon's normal into fairy moves, but like if Sylveon just used like Moon Blast, that's not as strong as a not fully evolved Pokemon, and that is just shocking to me. Finally, for offense, Azumarill has higher special attack than physical attack. This was surprising to me since I associate Azumarill with huge power doubling its attack, then maxing it by using Belly Drum. I've used an Azumarill just like that for raids in Scarlet and Violet, and I had no idea that without those modifications, its special attack hits harder. It's just weird to me. That wraps up offense, and next I'll be talking about speed. But before I do, I would like to ask you a quick favor, and that is to subscribe to this channel. It's getting very close to 2 million subs. It'd be really exciting to get there, and I can't get there without you. So, pretty please? Now for the first weird speed stat, Vikavolt is slower than Grubbin. This has upset me for so long, since I love Vikavolt and it would be a lot better if it wasn't so idiotically slow. Its base speed is only 43, 3 points less than its pre-evolution Grubbin, which is preposterous considering the dex says it zips around and performs acrobatic flying maneuvers. Escavalier is another bug type with illogically low speed. It has an incredibly poor base 20 speed, slower than a pile of sludge or a Pokemon with slow in its name. I could excuse this if the dex did not explicitly state they fly around at high speed. Clearly not! Escavalier is one of the slowest Pokemon in the game. Rhyhorn is only a bit faster than Escavalier, having 25 speed, which is quite odd considering Rhyhorn racing is a thing in the Kalos region. Is the stat ridiculous? Or are the races really boring?
Number 6 Snelly rockets out of the starting blocks, leaving the other two competitors in the dust.
Varoom zips around Scarlet and Violet and is difficult to avoid if it decides to attack you. This makes sense since it's a flying engine, and yet its speed stat is only 47. That's slower than Weedle. Veluza similarly attacks with great speed, yet its speed is only 70, which is slower than Feet for Legs Shroodle. I should mention part of Veluza's lore is that it sheds its own flesh to boost its power and speed, hence its usage of Fillet Away, its signature move that halves its HP to boost its attack, special attack, and speed by 2 stages each. Yet when a battle with Veluza starts, it's perfectly healthy, so either it's not shedding the flesh, and therefore moves crazy fast despite its speed stat, or it is, and is recovering before it attacks you, which would be nonsense, because it doesn't recover that health that it loses in battle. Wiglet has a higher speed stat than Revavroom, which, unlike Varoom, does not have ludicrously low speed. Revavroom's is 90, which is slower than I'd expect, but still decent. Meanwhile, the little Eel's is 95. Wiglet's relative Dugtrio is also weirdly fast, having a speed of 120. This is tied with Arceus, Arcus. You know, the literal god that teleports around the battlefield in Legends Arceus. Speaking of Legends Arceus, Weirdeer and Hisui and Braviary are used to zip the player around Hisui, yet they both have base speed stats of 65. That is slower than Cottony. Bouffalant is a big bison known for powerful charges, yet it is slower than Venipede. How does a bison move slower than a Tannabug? Celesteela, an Ultra Beast that people saw flying across the sky at high speed, only has 61 base speed. This is slower than Alcremie. The rocket ship loses to a pile of cream that doesn't have legs. My mortal enemy Miltank has a base speed stat of 100, which is a smidge faster than Genesect. Miltank is a stupid fat cow with sausage nipples. Meanwhile, Genesect can transform into a flying spaceship. How is the spaceship slower? 100 is actually the same speed stat as Galarian Zapdos, which is confusingly low for this Pokemon. It's a roadrunner that you have to chase across the wild area, and the dex explicitly states that it runs through the mountains at over 180 miles per hour. You're telling me that this thing runs at almost 200 miles an hour, yet it's slower than Dedenne? Is this hamster the Flash? Speaking of dex entries with specific speeds, Pidgeot states this Pokemon flies at Mach 2 speed. Mach 2 means twice the speed of sound. That's over 1,500 miles per hour. Yet its base speed is 101, which is the same as Dedenne. How fast is this hamster? Jumpluff, a dandelion creature that floats along the wind, has a higher speed stat than Iron Treads, a literal wheel from the future. Then finally for speed, Purugly has a base speed stat of 112. This is faster than Latios and Latias, which the dex says can overtake jet planes. The pudgy fat cat can outrun jets. Next up is bulk, and this one's a little trickier to cover. That's because a lot of Pokemon may seem frail due to low defense and special defense, but then end up having really high HP, making it bulkier than its defensive stats alone convey. And of course, the inverse can also be true. Additionally, HP and special defense are harder to visualize because they're like life force and magic resistance, and like, what does that look like? To simplify things, almost all of these entries will focus on physical defense, since how well something should be able to take a punch or a slash is much easier to visualize than HP or special defense. All evolutions have one stat that's a huge 130, but most of them make sense. Jolteon is really fast, Espeon has high special attack, Umbreon withstands magic and energy. But as we've already covered, Flareon hits weirdly hard physically, then Leafeon, a cat made of leaves, somehow withstands physical strikes better than a Pokemon hiding within solid stone. What? It's leaves. It's made of leaves. Macargo has a confusingly high defense stat of 120, higher than solid metal Bronzong. While rock types are known for having high defense, Macargo doesn't make as much sense here, since the dex says the shell on its back is just skin that has cooled and hardened. It breaks easily with a slight touch. The only thing I can think of that maybe justifies the high defense is that its magma body is squishy, so like a punch it just like squishes and burns. But I still think it's weird it has such a high defense stat when such a large portion of its body shatters easily. Huntail and Gorbis, two random eels, have higher defense than Made of Metal Celesteela, which I do not understand. Another Ultra Beast, Kartana, has an outrageous defense stat of 131. I get that it's a steel type and it's like a samurai sword origami thing, but like, it's paper. The thing is paper, and it has higher defense than Metagross? While not as high as previously mentioned, Horsey's defense stat is 70. This is oddly high since it's just a baby seahorse, and in fact is equal to the steel type Magnemite. Not all steel types have good defense though. Togedemaru, which is literally a metal ball of spikes, only has a defense stat of 63, which is lower than Chikorita. Lunatone's is also oddly poor considering that it's made of rock. Its defense is only 65, which is lower than Skinny Monkey Ambipom. Nincada, shockingly, has double the defense of its evolution Ninjask. While it's not unheard of for an evolution to get less bulky than its pre-evolution to focus more on speed or power, for example Porygon 2 into Porygon Z, Nincada's 90 base defense having down to only 45 for Ninjask is such a huge change that I needed to mention it. Finally for bulk, the only special defense entry, Mantike, a literal baby, has the same special defense stat as Cresselia, a Pokemon infamous for its ability to withstand hits. I should note that Cresselia was nerfed this generation, its special defense used to be higher, and of course its overall bulk is still better than Mantike, but still, a tiny baby having any defensive stat that's better than Cresselia is wild to me. And now for the final category, surprising base stat totals. Scyther has the same base stat total as both of its evolutions, Scizor and Kleavor, being the only instance of a Pokemon keeping the same total upon evolving. Nincada technically gets weaker when it becomes Shedinja, but really Nincada just becomes Ninjask and then Shedinja is created. So does Nincada really evolve into Shedinja? Spiritomb, a Pokemon well known for being incredibly difficult to obtain, does not have the power level one would expect from such an elusive Pokemon. Its base stat total is only 485, which is lower than famously underwhelming Unfezant. Beautifly has a higher base stat total than Dustox, which is uncommon for split evolutions. This happened because in Gen 6, Beautifly received a 10-point buff to its special attack, while Dustox did not. Similarly, Poliwrath is stronger than Politoed, its base stat total being 510 compared to Politoed's 500. Like with Beautifly and Dustox, this happened because Poliwrath got a Gen 6 buff to its primary offensive stat that its counterpart did not get. And finally, Onix. Just Onix. I will never understand why this incredibly large stone beast is so awful. Its base stat total is only 385, which is lower than small dragonfly Yanma and baby Pokemon Munchlax. I know they remedied it by creating Steelix in the next generation, but it is still insane to me that at any point in time, they thought it made sense for this iconic rock serpent to be so darn weak. Thanks so much for watching, with an extra special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon who are helping support my channel independent of fluctuating YouTube ad rates. If you want to help support me in the same way, the link's in the description below. And if you want to check out some more of my fun Pokemon content, I recommend these videos here. And that is all I have for now. So until next time, Pokemon fans, gotta catch them all.